Good afternoon. It is today when we're filming the Women's National League podcast or the Women's Premier Division podcast here on finalwhistle.ie. Of course, myself, Breifne, Earley, with you for the next 40 minutes or so, talking about all things FAI Cup related. Of course, the first round played last week. The quarterfinals draw took place during the week, and we have, of course, a full round of action in the Women's Premier Division this week. Joining me, as ever, is Aaron Clarke. Aaron, interesting week. Some things gone to plan. Maybe for PMX United, some things not quite gone to plan at Damon Park at the weekend. How was your week?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Tracking down the hardest man in Leitrim can often be hard as well, but wasn't too bad.
Yeah, it's been a. We missed last week's episode. It's start of Gaelic football season, and it does kind of eat into time available, and we just
Soccer fans don't care about Gaelic football.
No, I'm fully aware, but you know what? There's plenty of the people in the country who do, so we have to. I suppose we better when we're on the League of Ireland Women's podcast. I've met a couple of players from a couple of different clubs over the last few days, all around Croke Park.
wasn't that service stations this time? You have it running in.
Kind of up to Dervla Byrne on the way home from the game, having a bite to eat, both of us. And then obviously Muireann Devaney spent a bit of time with her over the last couple of days as they've been on a tour of the county, which has been interesting to say the least. So yeah, that's fun. They've been on a bit of a party, shall we say, over the last few days. Leitrim, of course, winning the intermediate football championship this year. But we're used to that now. We had Chloe Maloney and Laurie Ryan involved with Clare last year.
They lost, unfortunately.
Thanks for bringing that up. I'm sure. Thank you. Back to the soccer.
Former soccer player Orla Nolan actually did win one last year. Interesting. Just speaking of service stations, I never actually said. I don't know if I said the story to you. It's coming back from Páirc Uí Chaoimh after Ireland beat France and stopped off in the McDonald's a bit late. Wasn't for Moy. It was the next one. The next one further on. I can't think of the town. It was in Tipperary anyway, and we stopped off. We were ordered food, waiting. In walks Jesu, orders food, sits down, head down. Not one person in the place recognized her. I think she was happy for that because she just wanted to get her stuff, get out. And I was like, if one person had recognized her, she would have been swarmed. Now, in fairness to her, they were wearing them New Ireland tracksuits that you wouldn't really know are Ireland tracksuit because the Ireland logo's on the side. But like, it was sort of in with her brother, head down, and I was like, if people hadn't noticed her, it's mad when you see that, especially considering if she's in an Ireland jersey, everybody knows exactly who she is.
Yeah, but it goes to show maybe how low profile some of these players are in the national conscience. Like if Katie McCabe walked in, everyone would know who it was. There's a few others maybe in the team. Amber Barrett might get the same kind of reaction. Steph Roach previously, but a lot of these girls go under the radar because they don't quite have the same profile as their male counterparts.
Yeah, which is mad when you think about it, especially considering last year she would have been such a regular in that West Ham team when she come back from the ACL injury and will be playing at such a high level. And it shows there's a lot of work to do off the field in terms of the branding of a lot of these players, not just the ones who get all the spotlight all the time. And it's one of them that, like, I was a bit surprised it wasn't as recognized, but then again I was delighted she wasn't, because you could see she just wanted to get in, get out, and you know, especially after having a week in camp, just to get home after a game. And like, she's one of the lovely ones on the team. She's one of the nicest people to meet on the team, and she was able to get in, get out, and it's something I think we need to do a lot of work of in terms of building their profiles as well from a footballing point of view.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things where you kind of want to see these girls get the recognition and get the I suppose the exposure and the rewards that come with that in terms of prestige and maybe opportunities as well in the professional world too. But let's bring it back local again. We had, of course, the FAI Cup at the weekend. It's the first round. We have non-league involvement in that as always. The 4 semi-finalists from the Women's FAI Amateur Cup, which in theory are the best 4 non-league sides in the country. Of course, it's an open draw, so you might be missing 1 or 2 of the usual suspects, given if they've met earlier in the competition. But essentially, it's the top 4 sides outside of the League of Ireland in women's football, and it's been a struggle. Let's be honest about it. We're seeing teams struggle to compete, struggle to score. We haven't, as you pointed out to me off air, we haven't seen a goal from a non-league side in 5 seasons, albeit 2 seasons without any non-league involvement. But that's 3 full competitions without a goal, and it's calling into question maybe how they participate in this competition. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that'd be one. But like for me, I love the whole purist of having them in the competition. I think it's great having them in the competition, to have new teams in the competition. But when I look at it on the other side, then with the gap between non-league and the League of Ireland getting bigger and bigger every year, I just find it difficult because it's hard to see when you're seeing 9-0 losses. We've seen a 17-0 loss, a 16-0 loss in recent seasons, them sort of things. And like, that's the sort of thing we don't want to see. You never want to see that. Like, at least you see some of the games when it comes to the men's, even if it's with a first division side where they're competitive. Like, you see sides scoring goals or bringing teams to the last 10 minutes, last 10, 15 minutes. But like, when you look at some of these games, and I know we'll talk a little bit more detail about them, like the Cork versus Douglas Hall game, it was like 1-0, 2-0, 3-0. I think it was 4-0 after like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And you're sort of thinking, this could be whatever Cork City want. And I'm gonna bring this up because I see it on social media, and I'll say it because I've seen a couple of fans sort of saying, why did some of these teams not necessarily just play their weaker teams? But the other side of that is for them is, yes, sometimes you want to give players a run, or you want to give players an opportunity. I know Cork gave one or two debuts at the weekend as well, but you also want to make sure that your name is in the next round of the hat. Like, yeah, granted, you can make your 5 subs after 60 minutes if you're in control. But the biggest thing for them is it's just to make sure you've no slip ups, because the team who has that slip up is gonna see the reap of the, not necessarily the backlash, but it won't look good. And like, remember back to when that Shelbourne under 18 team all them years ago made the cup semi final. They beat Cork City in Talca Park. I think it was one of Niall O'Regan's first games in charge. They beat them 3-2, and then they beat Castlebar Celtic to make the semi-finals. Like, we haven't seen an all-league team winning since then, and that was I think that was 2016. I think it was 2016 when that happened, and it was either 2016 or 2017 when that happened, and that's a long time ago. But them sort of things we don't see. Like, I get some people saying since the National League has come in, non-league football has probably been neglected or rejected. But there is some good things that are happening. Like, if you look at this side of the country, the Eastern Women's Football League, it's only been set up the last couple of years. As we start to see more and more under-19s players coming through, some of these players may filter down. But that's the thing is, it's about trying to catch them sort of players and keep them players interested. Like, you look at a lot of these teams who are playing in the FAI Cup this weekend, especially if you look at the Terranures and you look at the Whitehall Rangers. There are a lot of players who would have played National League football who are older players. The players who would have had experience of playing National League, but then they've stepped off down the level. And like, it's difficult when you've had your time in the National League to then go away for and then try and compete with these sort of teams. Whereas you don't necessarily see as many of the younger kids who are coming in from finishing 19s, not necessarily getting a senior club. Them players tend to seem to be just drifting off away from the leagues, away from football. Whereas that doesn't help that sort of gap. That makes that gap even bigger because they're not coming in there. Like, there's no reason why these sort of leagues can't fill a gap between 19s and senior for some of these players to get some experience at adult football. I know there was players, and I think Saoirse Noonan's sister went from Cork City on the 19s back to Douglas Hall to try and gain some experience. And, you know, she was in and around potentially coming back to Cork. It didn't necessarily work out for her, but there's players who've shown that they can do these sort of things. And then the other side of it is when you look at, say, Ciara Smith has a good underdogs campaign, goes to Bohs for the first half of the season, and then goes back to Terranure after 6 months, started some games for Bohs. Be interesting to sort of understand what was the reason behind her going back. But the gap is just getting bigger at the minute, Breifne, and it's difficult to see. Like, I think you said it to me. I said the other day it was minus 27 goals from the 4 games. I think you said it was the same last year. And,
yeah, it's something of that nature. Yeah.
And the year before would have been something similar as well. So there's no closing off the gap. The gap is only getting bigger, and I'd love to rock up to a ground where, like, we had conversations off air, and you said there may be a shock this weekend, and I turned around and said not a chance.
Yeah, I genuinely thought we might see some shock, and I suppose on paper, if you look at it, the team bottom of the table, Sligo Rovers, without a win in any competition under Tommy this year, had only scored 4 goals all season in 11 games in the league, and we're up against Terranure, who a week ago had just won the Amateur Cup. Now, I don't know what the celebrations were like in Terranure after that, or whether they had their eye off the ball a little bit. But they came down, again, like you said, full of former winners of this competition, players who've played for years in the WNL, players who've won the WNL. I'm thinking the likes of Caroline Thorpe and Linda Douglas, Melissa Houghton definitely have winners' medals at this level. Niamh Geraghty, I think, has been involved in the league for a while. Also, Niamh Carroll has played in the league for a while. So there's plenty of Caroline Healy, another name that I recognize from the past. So there's plenty of players with a lot of experience in that competition, albeit on the older side of their footballing careers. But at the same time, that caliber of player should be able to compete better than they did at the weekend. And I don't mean that as a criticism of those individual players, because there's only 4 or 5 of them in that. The rest are kind of youngsters coming through from that junior grade. But if they can't compete with the worst team on paper in the women's Premier Division, and they're getting beaten 4 or 5-0 off the field, you have to question how these teams are involved. I think they should be involved. There should definitely be a bridge for these players to move forward in the competitions, like you see in virtually all of these domestic cup competitions around the planet. But it's how they're involved, and maybe you bring more of them in and let them play a couple of rounds between each other first before you bring in so you might bring in the last 16 of the Amateur Cup and they play each other down to maybe 4 before you bring them. I suppose effectively that's the same thing as what's happening at the moment, but I don't know the answer. And normally I'd have an idea around where you could improve things. I don't see how you bridge what is a colossal gap there at the moment.
No, but the one thing I do want to say, and I want to point this out on the record, is in junior football, there is a lot of good things that are happening. I think what's happening in Sligo, Sligo, the likes of Sligo, is brilliant. We're getting more and more teams. But the thing is, and people are talking about, like, they need more supports. I said this on social media, they need more supports. But people are like, they were like, men's junior football never got funding. Doesn't necessarily have to be funding. They need structure supports, things in play, so that they can help grow these leagues. And like the thing is, it's, and you see a team like that coming in who are the amateur champions coming in then to play Sligo Rovers who haven't had the greatest of seasons. And like when you said to me, I was like, I don't think there'll be any shock here. I think Sligo will win easy. Like I would love to have a day where you're coming into this competition and you're like, okay, X is drawn Y. Oh, there's a chance we might get something here. But I don't think that's going to happen in the near future again. And like I remember back to that Shelbourne thing where I actually thought that Shelbourne team on paper might beat Cork City. They had the likes of Sophie Waters, Megan Smith Lynch. Incidentally, Lisa Murphy played up front for Shamrock Rovers at FAI Shelbourne that day and scored 2 goals. Nadine Ryan, who's now in the States, was playing a goal. It's some really, really good young players, and they took it to them. But like now, it's a case of it's just a gap too far. And like I don't want to see any team going out being humiliated or being beaten off the park, because it does no good for women's football as a whole or as an overall to see the sort of results that we're seeing. Like when games are dead and buried after 20 minutes, it must be so deflated for them sort of players who are playing in them games. And like I think the FAI need to do more. They need to look at some, even, I don't know what it is, how they're going to bridge the gap, but it's looking at the whole of women's football as a whole and seeing how we can improve as a whole, what strategic plans we can put as a whole, not just focus just on the National League. I think there needs to be a bit of focus on the non-leagues as much, because a lot of talk.
I think, and the only thing I can think of, because I don't think it's anything to do with the current crop of teams or the current crop of players.
No.
It's not their fault per se.
No.
It's the system. And so maybe the talent pool just isn't quite there, so that these junior clubs have talent from 1 to 18 in their squad lists. Mm-hmm. I think they have definitely individuals who can potentially look at their history or their future at being at the top level, and they're either on the way up or the way maybe towards the end of their careers. But on the whole, I just don't think the talent pool has grown enough that at that level, spread that thin, there's enough talent to compete at the top level. I think that might change, and I think where I would like to see the focus put over the next 5 to 10 years really is in retaining the girls who don't get from under 19 grade into the adult National League sides back into junior football, back into their local teams, and actually having a recognized pathway where it's like, okay, you're not going to make it at this club in the Women's Premier Division, but there are 18 clubs in the area that we want to send you all to. And I think that's probably the only way forward. And I think it will take a decade. I think you're looking at the girls who are 13, 14 now, who are better than the 13 or 14-year-olds 10 years ago, 20 years ago. They come through the system. They get that under 17, under 19, and possibly maybe under 15 in the future League of Ireland experience. And when they reach the end of the League of Ireland path for that particular player, those that don't move into the first team squads, that there will be a route back to non-league. And I think that we'll see, you talked about the Sligo Leitrim League having a new junior league last season. They're going to repeat that this year. It was a huge success last year. But there's now 13 or 14 squads of players playing in this region every single year, and they're going to need bodies to come from their own youth teams, but also coming out of the likes of Sligo Rovers, coming back to the regional teams as well. We've seen bits of it. Orno O'Dowd played in that league this year. She would have been involved with Sligo over the last few seasons, and there's others, plenty of others. She's the one that just comes to mind. So I think that's the future, and maybe we're just in that gap between the talent pool not being there and it being saturated with quality players.
But that's how you bridge. That's one solution to how you potentially bridge that gap between them. But like the thing for me is, and I know this from certain coaches within the Dublin region in terms of the League of Ireland. I know League of Ireland coaches, certainly League of Ireland coaches, who've been out watching junior games, watching to see, can I pick somebody up? Can I see somebody who's just an exceptional player who's standing out here? I know coaches have been out doing that, and that's the thing, is that it's these players would then have to realise that just because they're playing junior football doesn't mean that the shop window was closed to getting back into senior football. It's not. And that's where I think we probably lose a lot of players at the minute, because some of these 19-year-olds, or when they don't make a senior squad, they tend to go off early playing different sports. They drop out of sport completely, whereas they don't necessarily see the option of going to junior football as a realistic one, because they think their opportunities then are done, gone, see you later. When in actual fact, it's the opposite, is that you can still, by going and performing very well and putting in the hard work, you can still reach that level of getting back to National League and getting back to where they need to get to. And I think we need to sort of instill that, and because there's no disrespect, and I'm not saying this, the National League clubs are going to get to a stage where they're going to need the junior clubs to sort of help with the players, because of the number of players that are just coming through every year, because they're not going to be able to retain. You can't sell a player a false promise either and just keep a player sitting there on your bench for 2, 3, 4 years where they're getting very limited minutes. These players also need to develop, and I think that's probably an ideal pathway, whereas hopefully it's something that Mark Callum can look at, how they can bridge that and sort of make that encouraging to the younger players. If they don't make a senior squad, go there. You might spend a year there. You'll get an opportunity, if you're good enough, to go and play senior football again.
Yeah, I think interesting enough, you mentioned Ciara Smith, the underdog. She didn't feature for Terenure at the weekend, but one other player from the underdog squad did take part in the first round of the FAI Cup for the non-league sides. Do you know who? Put you on the spot now.
Niamh Gardaí not playing goal. Niamh Gardaí wasn't involved in it, was? I know Jennifer Clarke was on the bench for Terenure. Charlie Graham was involved with Whitehall. Was she involved in it? Jeez, you put me on the spot. Go on.
Any or all of those may have played, but one caught my attention. Leah McHugh from Mayo was playing with Whitehall. Which also boasted a former international goalkeeper. Jennifer Kett was in goals for Whitehall. Of course, played understudy for Emma Byrne for many, many years, almost 20 years ago. She won't thank me for saying.
Do you know what? Actually, I'm so bad at that when it comes to, because especially I actually seen a picture of Leah McHugh, and Mick O'Shea had it up on social media, picture of Leah playing at the weekend. I actually seen the photograph and all. It just didn't come to mind. But I think there was quite a few, and I think like the underdogs was a success, but it also wasn't a success for me. And when I say it wasn't a success, what I mean by that is we seen very limited players make that step to the next transition or make that opportunity, where in women's football the chances of making that jump are a lot smaller than, say, intercounty when they win the Gaelic football and stuff like that. So I was a little bit surprised not to see more. I think from a content point of view, it was an absolute massive success, and it worked very well. But from an actual player stepping upwards to the next level, I think I was a little bit surprised we didn't see more of them step up.
I think that's, again, down to that talent pool, the depth of the talent pool. Maybe the girls they're bringing in just weren't necessarily close enough to the top standard. And I don't mean that again as a criticism of the players. It's just and the way that the competitions are structured. Of course, we haven't really talked about the FAI Cup games at the weekend at all. Let's maybe just quick a flash over we didn't have a game last week, so let's just run through the league results from 2 weeks ago. Shells beat DLR 4-0, Bows with a 1-0 win over Sligo. Cork City drew in Tala against Shamrock Rovers. Wexford had a 2-1 win away at the Markets Field against Treaty United, while Peamount United beat Athlone Town 2-1 in what looked like it might give them something to play for this season. Unfortunately, from their point of view, their season all but over after the weekend. They were beaten by Bohemians. Not a great result for them. Galway United knocked out of the cup by Shells 3-1. Good result. We'll talk about that in a few moments. Treaty United with that 9-0 win over Ferns. Rovers took penalties, coming from behind in a penalty shootout as well, to win that game against Wexford. Bows and that 2-1 win over Peamount. DLR 4-0 winners over Whitehall Rangers. Cork City, another 9-0 win over Douglas Hall. Sligo, as we mentioned, 5-0 winners over Terranure Rangers. We might not dwell on the non-league sides because we've kind of done that to death, and it's not really fair to pick over the coals in that respect. But the other two games that took place, let's start maybe with Bows and Peamount. Bows took their 2 goals very well. Peas will not be happy with the defending.
No, absolutely not. And I think from a Bows viewpoint, I think Bows are extremely disappointed when these sides met a couple of weeks ago in the league when our captain Karen Duggan popped up at I think it was an 88-minute equaliser to rob them of all 3 points. And I think we're starting to see a little bit more from a Bows viewpoint of what Ken Kiernan wants to do in terms of playing football. They're still quite naive in the sense that they can have that little lax of concentration or that lax of at the back. Like even you look at the goal, you can see it from the penalty. There was no need to make the actual foul in the box there. There's several Bows players standing around the Peamount player. They don't actually need to make that tackle at that stage. It's just that judgment. But the goals, I think they took them very well. The first one was a nice header from close range, and yeah, the second one I think Peamount probably won't be too overly pleased with in the sense of that they had opportunities to cut it out and just really didn't.
Yeah, so Pete's out of the cup. Another shortened season for them, really, in that respect. In terms of the league campaign, that win 2 weeks ago does give them some outside hope again, but really and truly, with only 8 games left in the competition, 7 points behind Shells and Athlone, and they only play Shells again, so it's going to be a difficult task to see them close that gap. Even if results went in their favor and they beat Shells and Shells were to beat Athlone, they'd still have a 4-point gap that they have to close.
And an ideal world for Peamount, what Peamount are hoping there for is when them sides meet on Saturday week is that it's a draw. That's what they're hoping for. The sort of bridge that gap is that them 2 teams draw. Like for Peamount, it's gonna be difficult to see them winning every game. But like you just look at the form, draw, win, loss, win. Like it's not even as if they're consistent. That's the biggest thing with Peamount. It's not even as if they are consistent. Like granted, when they play DLR Waves, we'll talk about that a little bit later. You'd expect them to get a result. Wexford next, then they've Shamrock Rovers. Like, can you realistically see Peamount getting a full wins out of the game? Probably not. And that's the thing about it. Like, if you were to say to me, can you see Athlone or Shells winning one of them winning all of their games because they play against each other? Yes, you could see that more than you could see Peamount winning. And I know I probably wrote James O'Callaghan's team talk for that Athlone game when we spoke before, when I said that Athlone were going to win the game. And listen, it was a great turnaround for Peamount, especially after being trailing and probably everybody thinking, nah, it's not going to happen. The interesting one on that day, and we probably haven't mentioned because we haven't spoke about it, was Kerry Letman. Left Shelbourne, everybody thought she was going to take a break away from football. James O'Callaghan picks up that phone. Kerry, what's the story? Fancy a run in Peamount, bit of European football. Kerry says yes, comes on as a sub, scores in her debut. What more can she ask for? What more can Kerry Letman ask for scoring on debut week for Peamount? I think it was a bit of a justification for her. Like, she's somebody who just fell that little bit short at Shelbourne in terms of what they needed. She's a decent player, but I think, and this is where I sort of said this, when you're playing in the midfield of the league and you're playing in teams where you're not necessarily expected to get results, where you're expected to work hard, you're expected to sort of put in a shift and stuff like that, and then you have to take that next step up in terms of quality. it can take a lot of time for these sort of players to adapt. I thought she done well on periods of Shelbourne. I thought when I heard she was leaving, I was a little bit surprised because the game she did play in, I thought she put in some good performances, and although her chances were limited, I'll be interested to see what if she can get more chances at Peamount. But like for her to score on debut, I think it's a really pleasing one.
The other team, I suppose, still with hopes of maybe having that title challenger Galway, plenty of games in hand. They're 9 points off the top, but 2 games in hand. It does show them, at least statistically, having a chance of getting back into that. They've no more.
Still have to play both?
I think so, yeah.
If Shell's on the, what is it, third last game of the season, they've Shells, because the only reason I know that is because Shell's run-in is actually... Sorry, the Shells on the second last day of the season, but Shells run-in is actually unbelievable. Is it second? No, third, because Shells have got Galway, Peamount, Shamrock Rovers in the last 3 games.
Yes, they need to have the points in the bag before they go into that series of games. But it's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. But Galway, as it stands at the moment, probably in third place in terms of the odds of getting a title challenge. But if they play like they played at the weekend against Shells, they can pretty much forget about that. Some very naive defending early on, particularly cost them, Aaron.
Yeah, and the problem is that's a lot of these things from a Peamount viewpoint have been mistakes that they've been avoidable, that they could have got away with. Like realistically, with that squad, they probably should be further up the table. They probably should have more wins. On paper, they shouldn't be losing to Bows, but it just shows when you don't put in when you're not on a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 performance that when Bows show up in a good performance, Bows can get that sort of result. And like for me, I would say from a Peamount viewpoint, I think they really need the likes of the new signing who we will mention later on the show, the likes of Nia Farrelly. They need someone like that. Well, might as well talk about it now, but because you look at the squad, Saif Doyle has barely kicked the football all year.
Yeah,
footballer of the year last year, absolutely majestic footballer. When you watch Saif Doyle, it's like poetry in motion. Sometimes she can turn on a sixpence, she can play a pass, she can score you a goal. I think she's played in 1 or 2 league games all season. That's about it. Like you can't be missing a part.
Doesn't he Farrelly coming in allow Karen Duggan to be used further up the field?
Yeah. Yes. I have said this all year. I absolutely hate Karen Duggan back there. I understand totally why he's done it, and I agree with why he's done it. But you have to utilize Karen where Karen is gonna be your playmaker, your person to get that guy. Especially when you've got no Saif Doyle, you have to have Karen Duggan further forward. And for me, this is the perfect opportunity to put her back further forward. Stick Nia Farrelly in centre. You can stick Nia Farrelly in centre back. She'll do you a wonderful job. She'll marshal that there. But like, I think realistically, that does free up Karen Duggan. And I think that's what Peamount probably need. Peamount probably needs. Like I've said with Shamrock Rovers earlier in the season, I'm going to say the same about Peamount. When Karen Duggan is back in centre back, the younger players, there's a lot more on their shoulders when Karen is further back, because they're the ones who are forced to dictate the game. Like I said to you with Aoife Kelly in Shamrock Rovers, Aoife needed a little bit of support in midfield. Aoife Kelly's been brilliant for Shamrock Rovers, just need that little bit of support in midfield. Whereas I think the same for the likes of Jess Fitzgerald, the likes of Ellen Doolins and stuff. The problem is there's a lot of pressure on these players to perform because they had stellar second halves of last season and they really put themselves in contentions. So I think Karen Duggan moving up forward should give them a little bit more of an opportunity to sort of settle. And I think we'll definitely see a lot more from Peamount in the last 8 games for sure.
Speaking of one of those younger players who has impressed this year with Peamount and previous years with Peamount, Erin McLaughlin, she's made the move across the channel to Portsmouth. How big a loss is that for James O'Callaghan?
Massive in terms of quality. The massive quality player lost out the door. The one thing I will say, it wasn't unexpected. That's the key thing here, is that they sort of knew it was going to happen. They knew it was going to happen because there's a lot of talk about happening earlier in the season. I think everyone's going to go over there. She's got a 1-year deal. I think there's an option for a 2nd year in that, so she's got to go and impress and take that opportunity. I think from a Peamount viewpoint, like, how do you replace a player of that sort of quality? Do you maybe look at pushing a Dervla Brown further forward out of defence and putting maybe an Aoife Brophy or someone like that in defence? Or is it going to be young Freya Healy who's going to step up and have a lot more opportunities? I think from how James is going to do that remains to be seen. The one problem when it comes to a Peamount is they've probably got a strong 11. They're like, and then 12, 13, 14 are not as strong. And then 15, 16, 17 maybe aren't ready yet. I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to Peamount compared to, say, Athlone, Shelbourne. They've got them Galway, they've got them players who are ready to come off the bench, whereas Peamount necessarily don't. Like, the one thing that frustrates me about some clubs, and Peamount do it in particular, is, sometimes they'll even name the players on the bench when they're not tugged out because they want to see their benches full.
Yeah.
Whereas that sort of thing, when you're at games and you see that, you see the players aren't there, and then you're like, okay, who's going to come on? And I think from a Peamount viewpoint, they cannot afford any injuries. In order for them to finish third in the league, I think they're going to have to be 8, 9 out of 10 every week. Yeah. Can they win six out of the last games? Yes. But if they show the sort of performance that they did against Bows, you could easily see them only winning maybe 4 of them.
Yeah, it's a big challenge for them. In terms of when we're, I suppose, on it, transfers around the league, a couple of other international transfers to note. Denise Sullivan has confirmed she's going to be staying at North Carolina Courage for the foreseeable future. That's her contract was coming to the end, so that's a big one for her. As well as, I think, I could be speaking on turn here, but Katie McCabe has confirmed that she's going to be at Arsenal for the foreseeable. That was a big discussion point as well, wasn't it?
I think she sort of said she signed the new Arsenal contract, I think, last year, but she sort of said, the Leon interest is flattering. The problem is for likes of Katie McCabe is if a club is serious about signing Katie, it's going to cost them a fortune, because Arsenal aren't going to let her go cheap. I wouldn't be surprised if Arsenal turn around and be like, we want $1 million. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Arsenal turn around and sort of hold out for that. We've seen bids of players in the last 6 months of their contract being upwards of $750,000. And I wouldn't be surprised if Arsenal come around and be like, no, we want $1 million. We want at least $1 million for her. And if she was to go to somewhere like Leon, who there's been a lot of talk about, she'd probably get a massive pay rise. But then again, she seems happy in London. She seems happy. So I think no matter what with Katie, Katie's in a win-win position. But I wouldn't expect her to leave Arsenal this late.
Yeah, Gemma McGuinness as well, pictured during the week in the new Bournemouth jersey, promoting that. So you can take that she's going to be. I think she had a multi-year deal when she signed last year anyway, but she'll be back in red and black this year.
Sophie Whitehouse has moved from Lewis to Crystal Palace, Charlton Athletic during the off-season as well. From Lewis, obviously got relegated from the championship last year. I think I'm surprised to see maybe a little bit I'm surprised that there's maybe not a little bit more movement in terms of Irish players, in terms of abroad, especially. Actually, what we're talking about moves abroad. I don't know if you've seen it. Chelsea Noonan has become the assistant head coach at Birmingham. Okay. She had been in Australia with one of the A-League sides in Australia, having previously coached with the Ireland underage setups. I think she played for Cork City. If my memory serves me right, she played for Cork City, and she's been doing a lot of coaching within the FAI, and then moved to Australia last year. And now got a gig as an assistant head coach with Birmingham in the championship, which is a massive move, especially for an Irish female coach.
Yeah, no, good to see more coming into the game. Not a name that was on my radar, if I'm honest. We might as well just round up the transfer news here. Becky Casson, of course, has moved back from Spain. She'll be with Cork for the rest of this season. Claudia Keenan makes the journey from Wexford back to Dublin. She'll be with Bohemians. She didn't really get much of a look in at Wexford. Could probably have realistically be number 2 in Bows for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I'd expect that. Wasn't on the bench obviously for the cup game. Surprisingly to see the club haven't announced it yet. They've registered an FAI Connect, which is madness to seeing that clubs are starting to now do these sort of things and not like we've seen a couple of other social media accounts when it came to the likes of Michelle Doonan going back to Peamount. They're not. I don't get this because clubs now realise that these sort of things are going to be they're public knowledge when they go into FAI Connect. So it's easy for people to sort of see. I think she will be. I'd expect her to at least potentially play in the under-19s. I think it's a bit surprising that she'd left Wexford. I know there was 4 goalkeepers, but especially with her being made the under-19s captain, the one thing I think from a Wexford viewpoint in terms of goalkeepers is they've stopped this now, but towards the start of the season and even last year, it was just the sheer volume of rotation of goalkeepers. I'd say it must have been not necessarily infuriating, but it must have been difficult to deal with. I know when PML done it a couple of years ago, it was the year they lost the title when they were swapping Nivri Burke and Nisha McAloon nearly game after game after game, and it was sort of one of them that was. It's a strange one. I don't like. You either have a number 1 at that age bracket, or at senior level you have your number 2. If you want your number 2 to play on the 19th, that's fine. But like, you can't be swapping goalkeepers week in, week out just for the sake of giving goalkeepers a run. I don't think that's fair on goalkeepers either. So I think
it's a problem in terms of the quality of goalkeepers that are available now. Like,
oh yeah,
you don't have to cast your mind back that far to remember when there was 3 or 4 good goalkeepers in the league. With all due respect to the goalkeepers in the league, there was 3 or 4 like standout keepers in the league. Now we've got 2 or 3 at every club, and I think that's testament to the underage leagues and the quality of the exposure of games that these players have got used to on a weekly basis, which is huge. 2 other goalkeepers making news in the transfer market this week, both returning to old haunts. Abigail Renane back to Galway United, and Abby McCarthy back to Cork City. So
both surprised me. And I'll tell you why. McCarthy, if she's finished her studies or she's just coming home, that's fine. But like, Cork have just signed another goalkeeper as well. Plus, they've literally just signed another goalkeeper in this window. So they've signed 2 goalkeepers in this window. What was said? Is she going to be the backup? Is she going to? Because they've also got young Claudia Fitzgerald there, which they need to be careful. Because that's somebody who's been touted about as an up and coming. She's done well. Made her debut last year as a youngster. Like, unless I don't know what way the dynamic is going to work there, because you've got 2 young goalkeepers. Like, McCarthy's still 20. I think she's 20, 21. Yeah. Like, she's still very young. She still needs to play as well. So I don't know whether it's going to be a case that what Danny's going to. It's a headache for Danny Murphy and a good headache, but it's just a strange one to see, considering they brought another goalkeeper in during the window. And likewise with Abigail Renane going back to Galway, for the fact that we know Jessica Berlin is number 1 in Galway. We know that, but they've also got 2 other good goalkeepers there. Maria O'Sullivan, who's lots of League of Ireland experience as well, and the I think the other one is a Hammer. Is the other one? Yeah. Like, they've got 4 good goalkeepers. Like, how are you gonna? Where are you gonna fit them all in? How are you gonna play them? Like I see last week, Hammer was the replacement goalkeeper for Galway. Like, the dynamic for me just doesn't make sense with so little games left, having so many goalkeepers. I know it's probably, people say, they're going back to their old clubs, but it's difficult to see where they're going to get game time.
Yeah, I do get that, but I think from the club's point of view, having those resources and having that, and again, I go back to the depth of the talent pool is a huge bonus for managers. It's a headache. You're trying to go into a dressing room like in Galway where you've got 4 girls. I'm not familiar with Kaylee Hammer overly, but I know she's played a couple of games. But you've definitely got 3 there who are good enough to play as the number 1 in a club in this league. You've got Jessica Berlin, and the other 2, Maria Sullivan, has extensive experience with Cork, impressed a lot of people. Abigail Renane at Athlone and Galway, and Kaylee Hammer appears to be as good as any of them. So all of a sudden, you've got 4 players. Like, even if you're playing them at the 19s level, you can only play one of them because they're all, as far as I know, over the age. I think Abigail Renane is probably the youngest of the 4. I don't know what age Kaylee Hammer is actually, but they're
Sullivan and Stephanie.
You can't play them in the 19s. You can play one, but so it means that any given week, one of those 4 is not even going to make a squad to play. Never mind actually the game, and that's a problem.
That's for me where the problem is. I understand from a club viewpoint about wanting to have the quality of players. I get that totally, but it's just about where are you going to get these players game time. Hammer is 25.
Okay, so yeah, they're all over age. So one of them can play as an overage player, but then the other.
So Hammer's played once for the senior team. She's played 3 times for the underage team.
Yeah.
For the under 19s team this season.
So you get to the stage where there's a player in the squad who's not getting game time, who believes they're good enough and is good enough to play in that level, they're not going to stay there forever. It's just not going to happen, you know. Anyway, finally, let's move on to wrap up the FAI Cup. We wanted to have a 40-minute show. We haven't even looked at next week's fixtures.
Just a quick one for you. I'm going to give you an interesting point. I've just looked at the under 19's last league game, our second last league game against Treaty United on the 14th of July. Neither of the other two who were mentioned were in goal.
Yeah,
they had an underage goalkeeper in goal. But
then they have to accommodate for that progression and that conveyor belt of talent to the club.
Likewise, I looked at the last game again, and they have a completely different underage goalkeeper in goal.
Yeah, so just talent coming out the wazoo over in MDC Park. Let's chat about Rovers and Wexford really quickly. Shamrock Rovers winning that on penalties. Decent game, some decent strikes. Disappointing for Wexford to concede the goal the way they did.
I think Rovers would, yes, very disappointing for Wexford the way they conceded the goal, but I think Rovers would be disappointed at the fact that they conceded so late. I think the fact that they conceded so late and extra time, that I think that will probably infuriate Colin O'Neill, because they could have easily held on and seen that out over 90 minutes when you're 1-0 up so late on. But talking about the goal from Shamrock Rovers, like, it's just a calamity of you can have it sort of take it sort of in and around the edge of the box, and a nice little pass through and slotted home well. Like the finish is taken very well, but it should never ever have been allowed to. The shot should never have been allowed to be got from it. From a Wexford viewpoint, I think you strongly be disappointed with that. Nice equaliser from Ella Malloy, but when it gets to extra time, you're sort of in the situation there that you're both sides are fatiguing, and then penalties, like it's a lottery. Amanda Budden went the right way a couple of times, didn't get to them. It's one of them. When Shamrock, as you said to me earlier before off air, when Shamrock Rovers are losing 3-1 on penalties, you're not expecting them to come back and win the shootout. I think there was some nice penalties in the shootout from Shamrock Rovers, but it's a tough one to take from a Wexford side when you get the penalties and you lose it. But it's always going to be hard when you lose on penalties. But I think Wexford put up a good display. They'll be disappointed with the goal they conceded. They can take confidence from it, but Shamrock Rovers will be happy to moving on. One big note from that game that we need to mention: Kylie Murphy made a 300th Wexford Youth FC appearance, or Wexford Youth / Wexford FC appearance. Absolutely astronomical.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And considering the last year and a bit, she has missed so much football through the niggles and injuries. 300 appearances, like it's something else, and it's a massive achievement for a player. It just shows our loyalty to Wexford, and she's somebody who she's like the likes of Pearl Slattery to Shells. She's that icon to the club, where she's more than just Kylie Murphy the captain. She's more than Kylie Murphy the person, and when it comes to, she's one of the people who's really entrenched in all things Wexford.
Absolutely. The quarterfinal draw, of course, took place during the week. Athlone enter at this point as the holders. They face the journey to Treaty United, to Marcus Field to play Treaty United. Shamrock Rovers and Shells, probably the tie of the round. That game in Tala, DLR Waves and Sligo Rovers. A chance for one of them to maybe get a really good positive on a season that hasn't really been impressive for either of them this year. Cork and Bows, again, the same. We could actually have a situation where, if I'm hypothesizing here, that if Athlone were to come through their semi-final and Shamrock Rovers and Shells come through the others, that we could have a side that's in the bottom half of the table in the cup final again this year. We've seen it in past years. It's not great in terms of creating a competitive game on the day, but it really could be an opportunity for one of these smaller clubs to, I say smaller clubs, but one of the clubs at the lower end of the table to really give themselves a crack at a FAI Women's Cup final day out.
But you know what? A couple of years ago, I'd have said, I hope it doesn't happen. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope it, because I think it'll just be, and we've seen the golfing class between Cork and Peamount when they played in the cup final. But then again, one of my most enjoyable cup finals was when DLR Waves played Cork City in the Aviva, and Claire Shine scored the goal to give Cork the cup. But like now, if you were to say to me, granted, you look at the draw and you see the winner of the, no disrespect them, but the winner of DLR Waves against Cork, against Sligo Rovers, no matter who they draw in the semi-final, they're going to be seen as an underdog.
Yeah.
So, like, realistically, I don't really mind, because this year the league is at a stage where if you're going to qualify for the cup, you're going to have to win 2 really difficult games to qualify for the cup final. So if you're getting to a cup final, it's not like previous years where you might have got an easier draw. There's no easy draw this year. I know Sligo Rovers are winless in the league, but you got to take into account they've got a draw against Shelbourne on the opening day of the season. They've got some good draws this season, and I think that win will give them a bit of confidence. But like, it's a really difficult draw for every team, and it was to put my money to it, I'd probably say you're looking at potentially in Athlone. Shells and Rovers is probably the hardest to call. I'd say DLR should come through against Sligo. I think Bohs will come through against Cork. I think Bohs won't make the mistake of not seeing out the game they did previously. But then again, Cork City love a cup run, so I wouldn't be surprised if Cork City just come and make me eat my words. And I'm looking forward to it. It means a couple of quick visits to Tallaght Stadium for myself, obviously being there for the All-Ireland Cup final, and then Shells and Rovers in the cup. And Shells and Rovers games have been quite tight, but listen, it's a great draw. It's entertaining. I'm just glad. All I'd say is I'm just glad 2 of the big 3 available drew each other. Yeah. That we're not seeing them all avoided, and we're seeing opportunities for the teams.
Shamrock Rovers haven't beaten Wexford in the last game. Well, progressed via penalties, but haven't come through against Wexford. Now face Shells. If they're going to have to win the cup, and we've talked about them kind of needing a good cup run, they couldn't really have had a harder route to the semi-final ahead of them. And then, of course, you could have the holders at Athlone potentially, if they come through that game, in that route as well. Like,
I'm going to say something here, and I know it's going to rub some people the wrong way when I say this, but you could potentially have Shamrock Rovers win 2 cups on their home ground this year.
Stranger things have happened.
The All-Ireland Cup final is in Tallaght as well.
Yeah.
There won't be a lot of fans of other clubs who wouldn't really like it because of, like, no punches being pulled here, but Shamrock Rovers' bizarre or strange way they come into the league with how they went about things. I think they've calmed it down an awful lot this year. They're not as brash when it comes to. I think they're careful about what they say this year because they realise the start they got off to, and they don't want to be seen as the way they were last year. But like, they've got 1 cup final already. If they were to win the All-Ireland Cup, they then go into facing Shells in an FAI Cup quarter final, brimming with confidence, having beaten Shelbourne in the All-Ireland Cup semi-finals. It makes for a really, really intriguing game. It's just a shame that someone like an RTE won't turn around and be like, do you know what? That's a great one. We could show that on a Saturday evening.
Question for you regarding Shamrock Rovers, because we've talked about them at length this season about expectations versus what's been delivered on the pitch in terms of results. They're 8th in the table. That's obviously patently not going to be accepted in Tallaght if that's where they finish up the end of the season. It will be a disappointing year for them on that front. Do 2 cup runs or cup finals or cup wins hypothetically save their season? Or do they need to get into that, say, top half of the table, 4th, 5th, 6th?
Realistically, they need to get into the top 5.
Yeah.
They need to get into the top 5 if they're to, and they need to get into the top 5 and win a cup to have been any way of a decent. If they finish where they finish and win the cup, Rovers fans will say it's still a good season, but from a league viewpoint, it'd be a disaster. Granted, it'd be a great cup run, but from a league viewpoint, it'd be a disaster over 20 games.
Okay, well, listen, let's move away from the FAI Cup. We're only about 10 minutes left in the show, given that we wanted to focus on this week's fixtures. That's not going to necessarily happen. Let's take a quick look at the league table as it stands coming into this round of games. You can see there in the middle of the pack, Galway, with those 2 or 3 games in hand on virtually everybody in the division as it stands at the moment. Shells and Athlone lead at the top of the table. They are 7 points clear from Peamount. Wexford a point back with Galway, a further point back from there, and then there's a bit of a gap, 2 points back to Cork, 2 points back to Bohs, a point back to Shamrock Rovers and 3 back to Treaty before DLR Waves on 7 points and Sligo Rovers on 3.
Just a question. I'm just trying to work this out. There are 2 games in hand. One of Galway's games in hand, obviously against Shells, is the boy that they haven't taken yet because they've had their second boy week. The other one is obviously the game against Treaty called off, and the third one then is the one that was called off for the weekend of the Ireland game, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I think so. 13. Yeah.
So you would argue that they should be favourites going into both those games against 2 teams in the bottom 3 in the table. Now, obviously, they don't always deliver on that score, but it is the Treaty and Sligo will be the opponents for those 2 games. So you would anticipate they would probably expect to get at least 4, but I'd say they'll probably be disappointed if they don't get 6 from those 2
and
games.
Then also, Noel, take that out. No, take that Sligo game Sligo game doesn't count. Because that Sligo game is to come. So that Sligo game's not count. The game that's actually postponed was actually Peamount.
Yeah.
Was the Peamount, because Shells and Sligo was postponed. That was the one that was supposed to be played on the 12th, because that was supposed to be on the 13th. That was supposed to be live in TG Car. You're talking about the Sligo games that's called off in next week for the All-Ireland Cup.
I'm confusing myself, so I can only imagine what the listeners are confused by. But yeah, they have those 10 games left and a good chance to get through that. But they effectively get to play everybody again, and it's going to be interesting to see how they can pan out. I think they're probably the outside bet ahead of Peamount potentially for a title challenge, but it's very hard to look past Shells and Athlone. And of course, Shells and Athlone in action this weekend. Shells make the trip down to Cork City, and Athlone are at home to Sligo Rovers. DLR Waves play Peamount United in the Belfield Bowl, the only game in the capital. That game at 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. All the other games at 5, apart from that Athlone Sligo Rovers game, and the other games just for completeness. Not even sure if that's a word. Galway United versus Shamrock Rovers and Treaty United versus Bohemians. Those games taking place this weekend. It promises to be a fairly exciting set of fixtures for everybody involved in the league, and really we're going to see that the league start to take shape in terms of how it's going to finish, because now we're seeing teams hitting their 14th game of a 20-game season. It's going to be interesting to see how, if any, major surprises happen this weekend and how they affect the title challenge. Can you see Athlone or Shells dropping points to Cork or Sligo?
Difficult. It's going to be very difficult. But the one thing I want to see from Cork City this weekend is just that they go out against Shelbourne and don't necessarily just buckle the way they've sort of buckled when they've played against them this year. And you get from Danny Murphy that he's probably disappointed with the way they've conceded goals and quickly against Shelbourne this year. I think that's the first thing that Cork City need to try and cut out. They need to try and go out there and sort of not necessarily give Shelbourne respect, but sort of go out there and feel that they're competitive in this sort of game. They've got to draw a win against Shamrock Rovers. They've got big results this year and they're capable of getting it. But in order for Cork to get anything out of that game, Cork realistically needs Shelbourne to probably be about a 6 out of 10 and them to be about an 8 or 9 out of 10 to get anything out of that game. I would expect Shells to win the game, but I think Cork should make it competitive. On the other front, Sligo should take an awful lot from last week, even though it was against Terranure, but I still think Athlone should bounce back to winning ways. The only fear you have from an Athlone viewpoint is the last number of weeks they've been so stop-start with international breaks, bye weeks and stuff like that. Can that potentially catch them on the hop? That's the only question. Well, if they're professional about their approach to the Sligo game, they should come out victorious, but I don't think they'll have all their own way.
The chasing teams then, Peamount, they face the trip across the city to DLR Waves. Wexford not in action this weekend, and Galway, with those games in hand, they host Shamrock Rovers. That's a big ask for Galway.
It's the most important game this weekend. One of the most important games this weekend. It's based off what we've already spoke about in terms of Shamrock Rovers being in 8th place and Galway looking to win the league.
Yeah,
a draw here is no good to either side.
Does a draw kill both teams' league ambitions?
Well, it puts a massive dent in Shamrock Rovers' ability to potentially push for a top 4, top 5 position. Yes. Does it kill Galway's? Not necessarily kills it, but it puts a massive dent in it, and it means they don't take advantage of the slip-ups that we've seen in recent weeks, where Athlone dropped the 3 points against Peamount, where you'd expect them to get something from that, and because Shells were only playing the game in hand they had on Athlone, it's their opportunity to sort of take that 3 points back from Athlone, and if they've any ambitions, they need to go on a run here and probably win the next 5 or 6 games and start to really build that bit of momentum.
Two teams then that have impressed this season in patches, Treaty United and Bows, both kind of in that lower mid-table position. Bows edging it in league position, but Treaty probably edging it in terms of goal difference, which to me is a fairly vital metric when you're analysing how a team is performing over a consistent number of games.
So when you look at this from a viewpoint of sort of the league, we spoke about, everybody's going to say, Treaty have lost 5 or 6 their last 7 games. They played the top sides. Bows have sort of struggled a little bit against them. Bows being inconsistent. Like, I'll ask this question to you. If you're to put your money on the high, not necessarily who's going to win the game, who are you making favourites for this game?
I think at home in Markets Field, I think, well, my money would be on a draw, if you're asking me. Probably a 1-1 draw. But I think if I had to pick a winner, I think Treaty probably have the little bit more guile to find a goal. But then both teams are capable of making a defensive mistake and costing themselves a goal. I think Bows are probably more likely to do that than Treaty. So I would probably edge towards Treaty, but it's ridiculously close.
I would say Treaty are slight favourites in this game. For me, this is the sort of game that Bows should not be dropping any points in if Bows are where they are capable of getting to. But the question is, are they capable of putting in consistent performances? Beating Peamount in the Cup is great, but how do you kick on after beating Peamount in the Cup? That's the big thing for Bows. And we've seen where they've had some decent results this year. Then the next game they go out and they lose, or they put in a bad performance. Like, they have a lot of kids there. Realistically, I know the Bows people won't like me saying this, but if anybody's to win this game this weekend, I was to put a bet on it, I'm going Treaty. But I think, like you, I think it could end up being a draw.
Yeah. In terms of top scorers in the competition so far, any thoughts of who might be top of the table? I'm not going to bring it up just to...
I think either Jenna Slattery or Casey Howe will be top at this stage.
Well, you have the top 2 of the top 3. Jenna Slattery is top 7 goals in her 10 appearances so far. Casey Howe in joint second there with a number of players. Chloe Singleton, Casey Howe, Erin McLaughlin, Kira Rossiter, Anya Gorman, and Ellen Dolan, all with 5 goals in the league this season. A couple of players back.
What number wins that this year?
Well, based on 7 being there after 10 games, you probably have to assume that maybe 13, 14 is probably going to be enough.
It's quite low, isn't it? But
I like it.
Season.
It's been a low goal scoring season, and we're not seeing the big games against top versus bottom where there's 7, 8, 9-0 games. They're 2 games this year, and that's
like, I'm gonna mention something just because one thing that was leveled at me on social media the weekend was when DLR were beaten 4-0 by Shelbourne. That, because I said the gap between the top half of the table and the bottom half of the table is still quite big, but on their day these teams are capable of getting a result. The reason why DLR lost 4-0 to Shelbourne, quite simple. So many of the goals come from mistakes from DLR. So the biggest thing that costs them, the lower teams, is their own mistakes a lot of the time. Like we've seen, that's why we're seeing the numbers of goals scored by an individual being really low this year, because the strikers aren't having it their own way, or the attackers aren't having it their own way. A lot of these tend to come from either mistakes or, you know, individual errors and stuff like that. And that's why we're seeing some of these goals. Whereas we're not necessarily seeing strikers take the league apart. Be interesting to see how actually, we didn't even mention this, Kate Mooney, how she gets on with Shelbourne over the second half of the season. Noelle's not scoring goals. So I know Noelle used to score goals. Noelle's playing slightly further deeper as well. So there's an opportunity there for Kate Mooney to come in and score goals. Will she score the sort of goals that Shelbourne needs? Time remains to be seen. I'm not 100% sure. She hasn't necessarily had a prolific goal scoring record. Granted, she had that good 6 months with Peamount, but before that, she hasn't scored consistent goals. And I think if she wants to start to prove herself as being a top striker in this league, I would expect her to score at least 7, 8 goals in the second half of the season for Shelbourne.
Yeah, I think it's impressive. Who's top of the goalkeepers charts in terms of clean sheets?
Amanda McQuillan.
She is 8 clean sheets so far this season. Huge.
Only 8? Interesting.
We may be missing one on that list, but according to us, it's 8. I'll have to double check that. But what impresses me is that we have.
I think you might be missing more than one. Do you know why?
They've only conceded 2 goals. So it has to be.
Only conceded 2 league goals.
Yeah, it has to be.
If I'm not mistaken, the league goals they conceded one against Cork City, and they conceded. Who was the other one they conceded against? I'm trying to figure out who the other team they conceded.
Sligo?
No, Sligo was 0-all draw.
I can't. I could take a quick look here, but on
Athlone Town. So every other game, because she started every game this season, so she'll be on 10 clean sheets.
Yeah, fair enough. My apologies to Amanda McQuillan. But yeah, there's been some really impressive defensive performances all year from both defenders and goalkeepers. And the strikers not quite having it all their own way for the first time in probably the league's history, really. It's been really, really tight for teams. But then we are losing talent every week, every year. We're losing talent to other leagues. Even Erin McLaughlin, we name checked there as one of the top strikers in the league. She's gone now. And others have left as well. So over the last couple of seasons. So it's very hard to keep those goal scoring charts when you're losing the top talent every single season to bigger and better opportunities.
That goes back to what I said about junior football earlier. We need to have an overall full evaluation of women's football, where we want it to go in this country, how we retain players, not just at senior level, at junior level as well, because there's no doubt there'll be a trickle effect as these better players start to come. So how we can retain our players across the board and keep them engaged in women's soccer across all levels, because listen, whether you're playing in the lowest league available or you're playing in the top league, you're still a participant of women's football. I think it's important that everybody who wants to play, or everybody who's played soccer, is encouraged to continue to sort of play that as much as they like, or as long as they can.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you any more than that. That's it for the week. We'll be back next week with a review of the weekend's action, and looking forward to the following season. I think the Avenir Sports Cup comes up at the end of that, so we'll be chatting about that competition.
Avenir Sports Cup final next Saturday. It has in 9 days' time.
Yep, so exciting times for everybody involved in that as well. A chance for the first piece of silver for Shamrock Rovers, but they will have to do it the hard way.
Don't tell Phil Trilly said that he'd be clipping that little clip is getting clipped, and it's sent to every Galway player.
I did say the opportunity for them to win their first trophy. Also the opportunity for Galway to win their first back-to-back trophy there. Phil will be happy now. Aaron, as always, a pleasure. We'll chat to you next week.